right, welcome back in. 4:15 from the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. We've been covering this Baseball Hall of Fame stuff. The 3 Hall of Fame inductees were announced yesterday. It's going to be Raines on his final year of eligibility. He gets in Pudge and also Jeff Bagwell. So now joining us is a Hall of Fame voter. That's Mike Vaccaro from the New York Post, who joins us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. Mike, appreciate the time. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm good, Zach. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. So when you heard the news yesterday that it's going to be Raines, Pudge, and Bagwell, what memories come back to your mind about those 3 players' career?
Well, Bagwell's dominant 94 season. You know, we talk all about, how 94 cost the chance maybe Tony Gwynn hitting 400 or Matt Williams hitting maybe breaking Roger Maris's record. But Bagwell had a monster year that year. In fact, he was the MVP of the National League that year. So that's one thing when he was young, he was just one of the most fearsome hitters ever. Injuries kind of took their toll over the years, but that's what I remember from him. Pudge, just what a remarkable defensive player he was, a clutch player, real leader. I mean, he was a kind of leader on that Marlins team that won their second World Championship, and he was really a vocal leader on that team. It's a really interesting threesome. I do wish that Vladimir Guerrero could have gone in with them. I know I voted for Vlad. I would have thought that he was a candidate, but ex-Post fans, I guess, do have the consolation that they do get Tim Raines, and they saw the very best of Tim Raines because when he was a young player, he was dynamic. He was maybe 95% of what Rickey Henderson was, and that's not so bad. If Henderson was the best leadoff hitter of all time, I think Tim Raines, is certainly in the conversation for the next. The leader of the next tier of leadoff hitters, and he was terrific. By the time he came to play for the Yankees, and I got a chance to cover him a little bit, he was kind of a seasoned veteran, but he was a really important member of those Yankees teams he played on. Really respected voice in the clubhouse. He used to talk a great deal. I can remember talking to me about I was a pretty good player back in the day, wasn't I? And the fact is, he was still a pretty good player in the present day. But he was right. The Tim Raines version of, say, 1981 through 1987 or so, which is about as good a player as there was in baseball.
The big enigma to me, and you mentioned it, is how Vladimir Guerrero doesn't get in on the first try. You guys get a max of 10 votes. How the heck does Guerrero not get in this year?
Well, I'll say this, and I've heard people talk about how he got snubbed. He still has 71% of the vote. Try getting 100 people together in a room and getting 71 of them to agree on anything. That's still a very sizable, number of the vote. He's going to get in eventually. Part of the problem is that, we are limited to 10, and the fact is that I think you can make an argument on this year's ballot for at least 15 or 16 people. And I think that legitimately you can make an argument for those, for those guys, depending on what your viewpoint is on who you vote for steroids, suspicious steroid players or PED users or whatnot. You can certainly make an argument for close to 15 of those guys, and that's how a guy like Vladimir, probably winds up not. He's not one of these guys like Ken Griffey who, if you don't vote for him the first time, people look at you funny and should look at you funny. But now I voted for him, but I certainly don't take issue with anybody who didn't. Because maybe they can make an argument for why they voted for Sammy Sosa instead, or why they voted for Edgar Martinez instead. That's how deep the ballot was this year.
I can't tell you without a doubt that a player didn't take steroids, but you bring up that steroid argument, and innuendo has killed some players and it hasn't killed some players. Like Bagwell had to wait a long time because of innuendo. Piazza got in last year but had to wait because of innuendo. Why did you think the innuendo about Pudge didn't play a factor here in the voting?
I think that shows the way that the voting body has evolved in a lot of ways. I think it also is, kind of tells you why. I think the future bodes well for guys like Clemens and Bonds, and maybe even Manny and A-Rod also, because the voting body is evolving. It's getting younger. Younger voters tend to be a little more forgiving about the PED era than the old timers, and as they're being replaced, I think those numbers are going to get stronger. And I think, I do think that Piazza getting in last year, and I don't think this is necessarily something he'd want on his plaque, but you're right. The fact is that he's a guy who obviously a lot of things were swirling about. Nothing could ever be proven. But then so who's in that category this year? Well, Bagwell and Pudge are both in that there. I mean, people, there was speculation, there were rumors. I mean, depending on who you trust and who you didn't trust, these stories were believable or not. But I think that's how things like this happen. That's how Pudge kind of eases in. Maybe more so than Piazza did, who had to endure a couple of years of worth of penance. Same with Bagwell. I just think that's the evolving nature of the voting body.
I was someone that I would put the steroid guys in. Like, I think Barry Bonds should be a Hall of Famer. I also think Roger Clemens should be a Hall of Famer, and I don't like to ignore the history by excluding them from the Hall of Fame. On your ballot, you have Bonds in and Clemens in. What was the deciding factor for you on that?
Yeah, I voted for them for the last couple of years.
Okay.
So I know a lot of people, decided to change their minds on them when, the chief enabler, Bud Selig, was elected by the Veterans Committee this year. I can understand that way of thinking, but to me, I guess at some point you kind of have to come to terms or come to peace with what that era was. And the fact is that we don't know who took and who didn't take for the most part. We don't know who cheated and who didn't. It's all completely subjective. It's all complete speculation. So to me, I think you have to kind of go with what you know. And to me, I mean, the era, I think, will forever be tainted in people's minds. I think there's enough of a historical context, a historical record now for people to know what went on during those years. But to deny that Bonds or Clemens were, not only two of the best players of their era, but two of the best players of all time, I think to me does a disservice to the Hall of Fame. I think you have to recognize them for the players they were. You can certainly make an argument that what we do think we know about those two players is a certain amount of work that they both did before they apparently or allegedly took steroids, and you could argue that also. But to me, when you're talking about the two of the dominant players of all time, the Hall of Fame is just simply incomplete without their inclusion.
Mike Vaccaro with us from the New York Post right now on the Zach Gelb Show. Overall, I think your ballot is actually a pretty fair one. One question I do have about your ballot, though, is you didn't put Trevor Hoffman on, you put Billy Wagner on. Give me the thought process behind that, Mike.
Yeah, that was an either-or for me. I wasn't going to vote for both, but I was going to vote for one. I know that obviously Hoffman's got far more saves than Wagner, although he pitched longer. To me, that just came down to the eye test. To me, Wagner at his most dominant was one of the greatest closers I ever saw, unhittable. And frankly, I mean, while both have spotty records in big spots, Hoffman had some real big clunkers in big spots that I think, to me, at least to me, defined who he was. I clearly didn't have a lot of allies in that foxhole because Hoffman was only a couple of votes short, and Billy Wagner's only about 55 or so votes. But to me, the eye test was what carried the day there. To me, there was never a question in my mind who the more dominant closer was at their peak, and that was Wagner.
Now, I've always suggested that you make the max 12 on this ballot, so I don't know if it's just because you didn't have enough room on it or if you have another reason, but why leave off Curt Schilling? In my mind, it was the same issue that the Hoffman-Wagner thing came down to. It was going to be an either-or for me between him or Messina. And, last year my ballot was such that I included them both because it was just the nature of that particular ballot that particular year. But to me, essentially my ballot came down to 8 plus either or Wagner, Hoffman, Messina, or Schilling, and I just with a lot of thought and talking to some former players, asking who they thought the one guy they wanted, to pitch an important game for them. Believe it or not, even though just given Schilling's postseason record, a lot of people that I respect told me Messina. Really?
And,
wow.
Yeah, because and he just to me his body of work also. I mean the combination of things, and that might change by next year. I realize that to me these ballots are very fluid. It seems like some people think it's a mystery. How can Tim Raines be only a 20% Hall of Famer one year and 10 years later be a 90%? Well, that's the reason why we keep their names on the ballot for so long because. It's an important thing to evaluate a man's career, and sometimes you need that long to evaluate. And opinions can shift depending on the kind of standards you apply. To me, I just it was put it this way: if there were 11 people on the ballot, I probably would have included Schilling. but we're only allowed 10, and so therefore I went with Messina.
I would have went with Schilling before Messina just because of the big game heroics, and I'm actually surprised that a lot of people were saying they'd rather go Messina than Schilling in the big game. That's a little bit odd to me. But with Schilling, I feel like a few voters are excluding him from their ballot because of his tweets. Don't you think that's a little bit ridiculous?
No, in fact, speaking honestly, I pondered doing that for a long time.
Why?
Because we should explicitly say here, it has nothing to do with his politics. His politics are well known, and they've been well known. I certainly voted for him, knowing what he was, not caring what he was politically. When you're talking about lynching somebody, that's a pretty serious thing.
Yeah, it was a stupid tweet. It was a stupid tweet by him.
It was beyond stupid. I mean, it's lynching has a very awful and ugly history in our country. And look, I mean, I could sit here and bore you by listing the name of the journalists who have died in the pursuit of their careers over the last 5 years. I'm not going to do that, but I personally take that pretty seriously. And you know what? There's nothing that a guy can do that would make him a permanent target. But I understand, especially I think a lot of people decided to give him like a 1-year suspension almost. You can argue that with that. You can say that it does nothing to do with what he did in the field, and you'd be true. You'd be correct with that. But we also do have the latitude to apply character issues to these guys. And look, I mean, a guy can have the most far-out political leanings possible. Steve Carlson got in the Hall of Fame with some of the wackiest political views you'll ever see. But to me, I understand why certain people couldn't get over the idea, of him, essentially approving of the lynching of journalists. I mean, that's just that goes beyond politics. And it's just a matter of basic human decency, in my views. But I chose not to do that. I guess it was easier because, to me, I voted him off my ballot for other reasons. And I will, of course, think about him again next year. I have voted for him in the past, and would have no problem voting for him in the future. But I understand why certain people would have included it that way.
The only problem I have with that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning his tweets or his political views, and I've had Kurt on the show before, and we debated Randy Miller about it. I just think you're opening up a dangerous box there when you start to judge people with their conduct on social media. Like, to me, what he did after his career, even though it was very stupid to send out that tweet, even though he said it was sarcasm, which I don't really buy that much, I just think that that's a dangerous area to go when you elect to judge someone off Twitter and stuff like that. Like, there's some bad guys that are in the Hall of Fame right now that are, that are in the Hall of Fame, like we were talking about.
Sure, and that's certainly a fair point. But I also think it's fair that Kurt Schilling realizes that he's being, adjudicated by journalists, and so to try and, to troll journalists in the most horrific way possible to invoke the term lynching, you have to think he had some idea there was going to be some backlash to this, and didn't care. I mean, at least you would hope so. You would hope that he would own what he's done. And look, I mean, I understand where you're coming from too. I mean, I do. I understand the people who say that, if you knew that O.J. was a murderer before he was in the Hall of Fame, would you still vote him in the Hall of Fame? It's certainly an understandable point of view, and might well be the right point of view. But I also understand the opposite point of view too, just because of the nature of what we're talking about. I mean, a lot of people, jump to it's why. I mean, I think it's important to make a separation between people saying, well, people didn't vote for him because of his politics. It had nothing to do with his politics, and everything to do with the notion of lynching journalists, which is just not there's nothing funny about that when you consider what the history of lynching in this country is.
Do you expect Schilling to eventually get in one day? Because he doesn't think he'll ever get in.
No, I do. I do. I think next year's going to be tough because, I think essentially you're replacing 3 Hall of Famers who got in this year with 3 likely ones next year, including Chipper Jones. But I do think eventually he will. For one thing, I think there are a bunch of guys who left him off this year for the reasons we've talked, who I think will probably go back and reconsider his candidacy again. And he's also got, look, we keep acting shocked when a guy like Raines, makes a steady progression to where he got in his final year of eligibility yesterday. And Schilling's right there. Schilling's got a, he's not probably where he wants to be, and probably not where he would be in a normal voting year. But there's still plenty of time, and his is a career that most of the people who do this voting, almost all of them that I know certainly, take this stuff very seriously and take their vote very seriously, almost to a comically serious, way, and in terms of taking it, almost over the top, and who they consult and who they talk to about, who belongs, who doesn't, what their opinions are. I think his is a career that will hold up to that kind of accounting, and I think eventually he'll get. I don't think he'll ever be an overwhelming 95%er, but I think he'll certainly get to 75 at one point. I really believe that.
Mike, let's get into the Knicks because I read your article about Phil Jackson and I loved it. I was never a fan of bringing Phil on board here in New York, and I'm not saying I'm a know-it-all with the NBA because I'm the farthest thing from it. I was questioning what the Sixers were doing, and now it looks like it's actually going to work out. With Phil Jackson, though, with what's going on, I just don't see a resolution to this disaster that's in New York. How about you?
Yeah, it's very grim, to be honest with you, Zach. It really is. Look, he gave $72 million to a center, Joakim Noah, who everyone in the league who actually was paying attention realized was done. And the Knicks, by the way, are 5-0 without him in the lineup. So what does that tell you about that? And they're not even halfway. They're just barely halfway into the first quarter of that contract, which is just a disaster. You could argue their best player right now is Derrick Rose, and he's not a guy that you think they could possibly give a long-term deal to, not only because of his questionable physical nature, but, given the events of what transpired a couple of weeks ago, his emotional makeup also. It just all goes to a lot of the worries I think you had with Phil Jackson. Look, there's no denying what a great coach he was, and I'm not one of these guys who ever qualifies what he did because he had great players. That's terrific. But there were also a couple of coaches who had those great players and did not win championships. So to me, though, it just comes down to this. If you're feeling sick or you have you're worried you might have a heart problem, you're not going to go see a really good dentist, right? There's a difference between being a good doctor and a good dentist. And in the same way, there's a difference between being a good, certainly a legendary Hall of Fame coach and being a competent team executive. They're two different jobs. It's worth pointing out that he did not have those jobs in either Chicago or Los Angeles. Those players were provided for him, and he got the most out of them. Good for him. It kind of reinforces just how great a coach he was. But, to have thought that was going – now, I was also in favor of bringing him here, but I never thought it was a slam dunk. I thought it was, an outside-the-box way of saying, well, why not try this? Because obviously he's a guy who's been in basketball for a long time and he's had success doing what he does. But I never thought it was a slam dunk, and I don't think you could have thought it was a slam dunk because they are two different jobs.
Mike, one thing you pondered in the article was that James Dolan likes Phil Jackson because the attention goes away from James Dolan, and you have Phil Jackson, who's the one that's answering the questions. With that being said, patience is always slim in New York. Larry Brown was here for a very short time, and even he got fired. With James Dolan, how much more patience do you think he's going to have with Phil Jackson?
Tremendous question. I think we're entering a really interesting crossroads starting, just after the All-Star break and the trading deadline. And I think that, Phil can spin however he wants to spin the way these first couple of years have gone. They won 17 games his first year, which is a year that he declared that they were a playoff team. He made moves early in the season to that would reflect his belief that they were a playoff team. He gave, an incredibly awful contract to Derek Fisher, who never coached a game before in his life. There were a lot of bad record. His track record is not very good right now. And there's only so much, I think, fulfillment that James Dolan can get for paying top dollar just for somebody to provide cover. At some point, there's got to be some kind of result to that. And we thought maybe at the beginning of the year, when the issue 4 or 5 games over 500, that maybe we were going to see that this year. Now it seems like it's going to be a hell-bent chase just to try and get back to 500. So I do think you're going to see a little fraying of patience. I'd be surprised if he's not back next year, Phil Jackson, especially now that it seems like his options are a lot more limited now that him and Jeannie Buss aren't an item any longer. But I do think that he's got to be like every other employee at the Garden, and he's got to show his boss that they're moving in the right direction, or else it could be consequences.
And the communication is so big that you documented in your article. And that's why I thought that this thing was not going to be successful from the start, because you know that Phil is going to micromanage everything that goes on in that organization. And he's not the coach like your other analogy that you brought up earlier. And you've seen now we're on the second head coach in the Phil Jackson era. And it's, okay, we still haven't seen anything develop. It's like, all right, how about you just coach, Phil?
Right. And look, I understand why he isn't, why he can't. I mean, he's, you know, when you do see him in person, it's kind of haunting to watch him walk. I think it would be physically difficult for him to make it through an 82-game schedule.
Okay.
And I know there was some talk last year, you know, somewhat joking, maybe he coached the home games and the games in Philly and Boston.
That's a disaster.
I mean, that's never going to happen. That would be the worst thing possible. So yeah, I mean, look, to be fair, he was hired on. And he told James Dolan from the beginning, I cannot physically coach anymore. So, you know, to be fair, Dolan knew what he was getting. He was not, you know, he was not lured here with the prospect, well, maybe I'll feel better in a year or two, which is too bad, because I do think that I actually think this particular group of Knicks, Porzingis and Rose and Carmelo, I think that were they able to buy into Phil Jackson, the coach, I think the results would have been a lot more interesting than they are. Just simply haven't been acquired by Phil Jackson, the president.
Mike, before we let you run, as we're talking to Mike Vaccaro from the New York Post, what happens with Melo? Is he going to be a Knick when he retires?
I think so. Look, you know, it was very important for him to get that no-trade contract because he likes it here. He likes living here. His family likes it here. He likes working here. And it's not like it's been a complete joyride for him. I mean, he gets booed at home now, you know. I give him a lot of credit because, you know, for his quality of life is as important to him as his basketball career, and I think that shows a little bit of perspective that some players don't have. I don't think it's quite to the level now that some people think, where it's become a thing where, you know, he's almost defiantly he wants to outlive Jackson here or outlast Jackson here. Although I think that's ultimately going to happen, but I just think he genuinely likes being in New York, and he likes playing in New York. And I have a hard time envisioning him improving a deal that would, you know, take him away. I really think he's going to retire here.
Mike, last prediction from you, Mike Vaccaro from the New York Post, and we'll have the clairvoyant Mike Vaccaro join us right now. NFL picks this weekend. Who do you like?
Well, who I like? I would love to see the Patriots and the Packers, only because, I mean, that would be just an incredible Super Bowl, 2 weeks worth of Brady versus Rodgers, and, you know, kind of like, you know, 60 minutes to see who really is the best quarterback of this generation, and that would be a lot of fun. I think we're more inclined to watch the Patriots advance. I just love the role the Falcons are on, and while I think there are going to be a lot of people who don't necessarily root for the Packers, who are going to root for the Packers this week rather, I just see I have a hard time not seeing both home teams advance.
Well, Mike, we appreciate the time. This is great stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Zach. Great talking to you.